Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 299. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the morning of Saturday, January the 7th, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County. This is podcast 299, and I've been trying to get this guy on my podcast since probably about podcast 13. So he's finally graciously allowed to decide to come on. So welcome to the podcast, Brad Hildebrand. How are you, sir?
Hey, can't we just wait one more podcast? I can be podcast number 300.
You know, I really thought about that. Here's what I thought about doing. Joe Rogan purposely waited to have Alex Jones on his podcast for podcast number 911. So he had to have Alex Jones on podcast 911. Okay. So I thought about delaying this one more time. But I thought, you know what? If I put it off one more time, it may be 4 years before you graciously decide to come back on again. So I didn't want to do it. So you're 299. How's that?
Well, maybe Joe Rogan should have gone with Alex Jones a little earlier and had him on podcast number 666. How about that?
that might have worked too.
that might have been more appropriate for Alex Jones. Although I'm not trying to offend any of the Alex Jones fans out there, but he is a little bit interesting.
He's a whole lot interesting, and I think he's a whole lot interesting. But for those of you who don't know Brad, and I don't know that there's many of you out there who do not, Brad has been around radio since Marconi, I guess, a long time. Put it this way. I listened to you as a boy, okay, as an older boy, but then to be fair, you were on the radio when you were a boy practically, right?
I was KSOQ. 18. Yeah, I was 18 when I started. This is 2023 is year number 50 for me.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
You can imagine that. Yeah.
I would listen to you on KSOQ when you were Brad Who.
Yeah, that was back in the old Lee Ford talk show days. That was my first. I worked at night answering the phones for the Red Baron, going way back when.
I remember him.
Yeah, and then they paid me. Matter of fact, I worked for free for 6-8 months, and then they needed a producer for the Sunday night talk show, which was interesting because I was a guy by the name of Lee Ford. And I won't give his real name, but Lee Ford actually was a police officer and worked for one of the local police departments. And Lee took me under his wing and taught me a lot about. Matter of fact, the interesting part of it was at the time when I was doing the talk show, I was producer, and he would have me on the air from time to time. I was actually working as a police dispatcher. I actually worked my way through college as police dispatcher. I had I was one of these guys. One summer I had 5 jobs, but I was police dispatching. I was working at KSOQ, the original KSOQ. I was umpiring Little League Baseball. I was doing lawn work, and I can't remember. And I was working at Steak and Shake still, as a curb boy. So I had all these crazy jobs. So yeah, back in the day, way back when, with Lee Ford, the talk show, Brad Who. That's what he called me because nobody could remember my name. Brad Who?
That was back. The morning guy back then was Patrick J, if I remember correctly.
He came later. There was a guy
okay.
Yeah, when I first started working, there was a guy by the name of can't remember his name, but man, I could write a book about all the crazy people I worked with back in the day, back in the radio business. I mean, I'll give you a quick story that you may find interesting. The radio business back then was very transitory. I mean, literally, these guys were climbing up the ladder. You typically started, if you hear the story, like Glenn Beck started at a radio station in his hometown when I think he was 13 or 14 years old. And the radio business ultimately is you want to end up in Chicago, LA, or New York, and then ultimately you want to be national. You want to be like a Rush Limbaugh or something like that.
Right.
Anyway, I worked with a guy who literally had blow up furniture. The kind like the raft. The raft you'd use on the. You blow it up. You put your mouth a little valve. You blow it up.
Sure.
The guy, and he drove a Volkswagen Bug. And when he got a new job or got fired, one of the two, he would just literally go to his apartment, pull the plug on all his furniture, let the air out, roll it up, put in the back of his Volkswagen. He was off to the new city. Honest to God. I mean, I didn't believe him. And he invited me over to his apartment one time. And I go, man, you do have blow up furniture. That was it. Everything sat in the back seat in the front of his Volkswagen Bug.
Well, if you listen to all the radio guys who have made it, they all tell the exact same story. Whether I mean Glenn Beck. I first heard Glenn Beck when he was the local guy at WPHT in Philadelphia, but he was the local guy. He was not syndicated. And I told everybody who would listen and some that wouldn't. I said, "Look, this guy Glenn Beck is going to be the next big deal. Trust me." And about 6 months later, he was. But Glenn Beck, Rush Limbaugh, Phil Hendry, Tom Likas, all those guys start off in tiny, tiny markets, and then they grew and grew and grew and grew and grew.
And that's the way the radio business was. And unfortunately, first off, I got this stuff in my blood. It's like radio ionization or something like that. I can't get it out. And I'm very frustrated with the state of what's happened in the radio business. And the problem is the small market stations used to be where you went. As a matter of fact, I used to give the example that radio is a lot like baseball. You play it, and once you graduate from high school, if you're any good, you go to play rookie ball. And then if you're any good, you go to Class A team, and then a Class B, and then, a double A, and then a triple A. And ultimately, if you can make the jump from the triple A to the bigs, as they call it, or the show, as they call it, then you end up in the major leagues. A lot like radio. Well, unfortunately, both ends of the equation are gone.
Yeah.
Most of the small radio stations are all automated because they can't find people who want to work, and B, they can't find people who want to work, and C, they can't find people who want to work.
Yeah.
So they've gone automated, and the big stations like iHearts are all like, to the point where this is peeking behind the scenes. But if you hear one of the jocks that's on one of the stations here in St. Louis and KLOU, chances are he's not here in St. Louis. Chances are he's in another market, and it's called voice tracking. And he comes in, and typically what's sort of sad about it is a lot of these guys aren't even full time. They come in and they work 4 hours a day. They work 1 hour doing they do a 4-hour show in Chattanooga, and they dump it into a computer that automatically shows up in a station in Chattanooga. Then the next hour they record a show that's going to Milwaukee, and the next hour it's Denver. And in 4 hours they've done four-hour shows in 4 different markets. And then after 4 hours they go home and they drive DoorDash or something like that to make a living. You know what I'm saying?
KLOU is exactly like that right now. I mean, if you listen to KLOU middays, they have Martha Quinn, the old
that's right,
VJ
that's
on
right.
there. Yeah,
right.
She's not doing that out of their studio. There's no way.
Right. And so what technology has been good and it's been bad, because one of the things, as you know, and see, you started fascinating to me because you haven't, you've been a radio fan since like you were a kid, right?
Since I was a young boy. I tell you how long. My first big radio DJ that I fell in love with and just loved listening to him was, actually there were 2. One of them was Harry Gunther on the old KSD 550.
Right.
He was the evening guy. And the other one was John McCormick on KMOX. They were storytellers.
50,000 watts of
50,000 red hot watts.
Right.
The man who walks and talks at midnight.
Right. do you know, I knew a guy. Do you know who Craig Roberts is?
The name sounds familiar, but I can't place it.
Craig Roberts is a guy who has an interesting background, and there's a bizarre story between Craig and I, which I won't go into. But Craig worked at KXOK and was making a boatload of money, and he hated me at the time because KSOQ was kicking. That was when KXOK was still playing music, and we were kicking their butts.
The old 6:30 a.m.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they were, for a long time, they were the hot top 40 station in town. They were the station. Matter of fact, if you go back into the early 60s, KXOK beat KMOX all the time. Matter of fact, that was the day when KXOK had all these famous disc jockeys who went on to work like in LA and Chicago, and WIL was also a top 40 station. And guess who worked there? Jack Carney. Jack Carney worked in WIL.
That's right. Yeah, he did
a long time ago. But anyway, Craig hated me, and then we became great friends because he lost his job because KSOQ kicked their butt, and they went to talk. And Craig used to be really good friends with John McCormick, and he used to go down and sit in the studio with him at night, because Craig was another radio nerd. And Craig said that John would come in, he would turn out the lights in the studio. I had one of those little, if I said a little Tensor light, does that ring a bell to you?
Yep. I've heard the story. Yeah.
And a little Tensor light, they'd plug in, and little tiny light, like almost like a reading light. And he'd sit there with the studio totally dark with the light on so he could read his copy. And he had this, and John drove a Corvette.
He did.
Yeah,
Bob,
like he
Bob,
was
Bob Hardy used to tell the story about how, because he was the morning guy, him and
right,
Rex Davis were the morning guys, and they would pick up
right.
at 5 a.m. after John McCormick would go home. And as they're coming in, here's John McCormick going out back over to the east side where he lived with his Corvette, red Corvette with the top down, waving goodbye. And he did that well into his 70s.
Yes, exactly. I'm thinking to myself, if there's a guy, and you listen to him. When I knew this story about him, I thought to myself, that's the guy I want to be.
Yeah.
I want to be that guy.
Yep.
I want to be the guy who's working the night shift, and at this huge station, doing his own thing, and then jumps in his Corvette, drives home. Hey, honey, I'm home. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he was the guy. I mean, he would tell these stories. Okay, he would play music like 1940s big band music, but then he would tell the story, and after he's done with the story, there'd be the pause, and then he'd say, "And now you know," and via radio.
Now you know via radio. See, the interesting thing about this is the funny thing with you and I. I first heard about you. Can I mention the callers? Is that okay?
Of course, please.
I first checked you out on KLPW in Union, and I thought to myself, okay, here's the weekend guy, and I know I'm getting in trouble for saying this. Here's the weekend guy on KLPW, who's the best guy on the entire radio station. What's he doing working 2 hours on Saturday? You work from 11 o'clock in the morning till 1 in the afternoon, right?
That's when I was on, correct.
Right. And the crazy thing is, this is James Strong. This is what's fascinating to me. He had his own sponsors. He would go out and sell his own advertising.
I
did. And I'm thinking to myself, this guy is the radio station owner's best. This guy is like a dream come true, because as you know, James, most of these guys and I've worked with them through the years, and I still have, unfortunately, know some of these guys, they're prima donnas. Matter of fact, one of my bosses used to always say, the problem with radio, with DJs and radio talent, is their show gets too big for the room. And if you've been in most radio studios, they average like 10 foot by 10 foot, 10 by 15, something like that. They're small rooms, right?
Usually, yes.
And the idea being is, if your show gets too big for a 10 by 20, or, let's call it a 20 by 20 room, which is a fairly large radio studio nowadays, that's like, okay, that's still like little tiny space. And in other words, the idea being is their ego takes over and the whole bit. Well, so I'm listening to you thinking to myself, who is this guy? So I started calling in on a show. Remember that?
I do.
And then you and I sort of hooked up. Matter of fact, I think the first time I ever met you personally was at the Town and Country Fair.
It absolutely was. And we had a very long conversation just about the radio business.
See, now, what fascinates me about James, I don't know if James talks about this. Do you still travel the world, or is that gone since the COVID thing?
My world has gotten smaller. I mean, we put the day job. I'm a traveling salesman, industrial salesman. That's how I make my money. I didn't make it in radio, but I would travel the world. After COVID, I didn't travel anywhere. I'm back to traveling now, but it's kind of North America, only because the business has changed and it doesn't pay to go to Europe and to Africa or into Asia and all those places. So North America is where I travel. In fact, I do travel a lot. I'll be gone next week traveling. So yeah, I still do it.
Here's the old James Strong thing that fascinated me. He'd get on the air on Saturday and he'd say, well, this is James Strong, and this past week I was in China when I was in the Xinjiang province, and they've got it. And I'm going like, is this guy for real, or is this because radio people, we don't make a lot of money in the radio business. Most radio people are lucky they can travel to Peoria on the weekend. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's, so here's this guy every week. And this week I was in Denmark, and I was in Copenhagen. And, last week I was in Rio de Janeiro. And let me tell you, those Rio de Janeiro people really love their whatever. I'm thinking, is this guy for real? And you started telling these stories. And what's interesting is, as you travel, especially the country, you'd listen to talk radio stations.
Yeah,
and you talk about Tom Likas in L.A. People in St. Louis have no idea who Tom Likas is. And I'm thinking to myself, this guy is a real radio fan. I mean, this guy, and the business probably better than most people who are in the business.
It's always fascinated me. And that's kind of how I got into radio. I mean, I listened to these people throughout all over the country, all over the world. And I thought to myself, you know what? I think I could do this. And you first heard me on KLPW, but I started on WGNU. And
I didn't know that.
I did. I was there. I interviewed with Charles Gear. He liked me. He said, but we don't have any openings right now. And then he got a phone call, said, oh, well, we kind of do have an opening because the guy tonight called in sick. What are you doing tonight? I said, I'll be there.
Was that when they were in the in Chuck Norman's bedroom?
Yeah, over there off of just north of Forest Park.
Yeah, off of Lindell. Yeah,
off of Lindell on Union Boulevard, actually.
Right, Chuck Norman, who owned WGNU at the time.
Yeah, and he was still alive and owned the station back then.
Right, Chuck Norman lived in a high-rise apartment building.
Yep,
and he rented the apartment next to him, and that's where the studios were, literally.
Yep,
and
that's true.
To the point where I think the main air studio had a bathroom right off because the main air studio was like a bedroom, wasn't that the deal?
It was a big bedroom with the producers up. The producer had a little like a crow's nest up there where she would work. But it was a converted bedroom, like a master bedroom, pretty good size actually. But it was a converted bedroom.
And the story was, I don't know if this ever happened to you, the story was that sometimes Chuck would come out of his apartment next door to the studio, and he'd just have like his bathrobe on, and he'd just like be in like barefoot, and he'd walk around in the studio, check things out, talk to the people on the air, and then walk back, walk a couple doors down the hall to his apartment. Is the radio business weird or what?
It is weird, and talk about weird. When I was on Thursdays on WGNU, the guy on before me was a fellow who's passed away named Onion Horton, if you remember him.
And okay, can I tell you the Onion Horton story? And tell me if this is true or not. Onion Horton used to wear an old school lavalier microphone. Am I telling the story right? You know what I'm talking about?
I've never heard this story. This is new to me.
Okay. Onion Horton, you remember, if you go back in TV, now they have the little tiny lapel mics you can barely see, wireless mics. Back in the day, you used to have this cord that went around your neck, and it was like wearing a necklace. And the lavalier microphone hung down on your chest, and it had a cord that went out the back of it. Okay. And Onion Horton, I saw this one time and I thought to myself, I can't believe I'm seeing what I'm seeing. He had this old school lavalier microphone, something that Channel 4 probably threw out back in 1965. And he would wear this microphone. And at times when he was on the air, he was in the bathroom, going to the bathroom while he's on the air. He's literally, can I say this? Going number 2 while he's on the air, literally. And since the lavalier microphone was not a directional microphone, it was an omnidirectional microphone, it sounded real hollow. And especially when we got into the bathroom, it sounded like he was in an echo chamber.
You know what? I remember his show. All of a sudden, it would sound like he was in an echo chamber, and then he wasn't. So that's what was going on then.
He was in the bathroom, and he had this lavalier microphone, and he'd just walk around in the studio. And it was interesting because he wouldn't sit down. He would stand up and walk. He was like the man who walks and talks, but he wasn't John McCormick. And go like, okay, what? And so what's sad about this is there used to be lots of characters in the radio business, lots of personalities.
Sure.
And then corporate America took over. And then iHeart came in. And unfortunately, I lived that because that happened in 1996. It used to be back in the old days, the FCC rules, you can only have 7 AM and 7 FM stations. You can only have one in each market. So the big companies like CBS had KMOX and KMOX FM, and Westinghouse had KDKA and whatever their FM station was. And then in 96, they changed it to 28 stations. And then it went to, I don't know, 35 stations. And then all of a sudden one day the FCC said, you can have as many stations as you want in a market, as long as you don't have a certain percentage of the listenership, and then it becomes an FTC thing, or what's the thing? Well, is it FTC that who manages the monopolies? Is that the FTC?
FTC or FCC? FCC.
Well, yeah. So in other words, you could have as many as you want. And then what happened on the course of 10 years? All these stations, everybody went crazy. And you had this company, I think Y98 at one point in time was owned by 4 different companies in 3 years. And It just got to the point where, matter of fact, there's an interesting story about the day that KSD, KS 93.7 KSD, when JC was still there in the morning show, that got taken over by Gannett. Gannett sold to Easy Communications, and all of a sudden, Karen Carroll became his boss, and he hated the fact that he worked for a woman. And he talked about this on the air. Wow. I mean, I work for a woman. I hate working for a woman. I'm going like, damn. Can you imagine him doing that nowadays?
No.
I mean,
Cancel culture would not allow that.
Well, but here's the crazy thing. I worked for Karen Carroll. Karen Carroll started me in my business, my traffic network. I embraced Karen Carroll because she was this incredibly smart and incredibly trailblazing woman, and that I just absolutely loved working for. There were guys that when she took over the station literally quit because they didn't want to work for a woman.
Well, what I heard about Karen Carroll, I've never met her, okay, but what I heard about Karen Carroll is she was very smart, she was very savvy, she was very successful, but she had her way of doing things, and if you didn't like it, bottom line is she's the boss, not you.
Right. It was her way,
that's the way management should be. I mean,
but she was so good at her job. Ultimately, she became the general manager of Camo X. Back in the day when Camo X was still the number one station in the market, you didn't get to be the GM by having coffee with somebody. You got there by being A, really good at your job, and B, more importantly, being a true general manager in that she cared about the programming, and more importantly, she cared about the bottom line. She cared about the station making money.
Yeah.
And as a sales guy, that's the sad thing with so many businesses nowadays. My old boss, Ted Smith, who was an interesting character, who actually was, I don't know if I told you the story or not. He actually was born in England, fought in World War II, was a Spitfire fighter pilot, started in 39. A lot of people don't realize, but the British were in the war way before we got in.
Absolutely.
The Battle of Britain was way before the United States got into the war. Anyway, he came to the United States when he was like 18 or 19, became an American citizen, and he had on the door of the sales office a plaque. All it said was NHT SSS. You as a salesperson get a kick out of it. You know what that stood for?
No.
Nothing happens till somebody sells something.
Which is absolutely true.
And HTSSS. That's where Karen was. Karen was a consummate sales pro. And once again, I was at the time, I was what, 20, 24, 25, something like that. Or even maybe a little bit older than that. Sometimes she would take me because I was still flying the helicopter. That's how I get to know Karen real well. And when the new company took over, they didn't want the helicopter anymore. She would take me we'd go visit other stations because we were trying to put together a traffic network. I ended up doing it by myself. She would set up appointments. She says, okay, Brad, tomorrow we're going to see Craig at WIL. So I'd meet her in my office. She'd throw me the keys to her Mercedes, which was always parked out in front of the radio station, and I would be her driver. And I'd drive her downtown. We'd meet with Craig. I think his name was Craig Hodgson, or
not Craig Cornett.
No, not Craig Cornett. He was the general manager.
Okay.
We'd have meetings with these people, and it was fascinating. And I got to the point where and then ultimately, I don't know if you know this or not, but ultimately she bought a bunch of the Sylvan Learning Centers in St. Louis. And then she was one of my clients on KSOQ.
Wow, I did not know that.
Because she owned the Sylvan Learning Center out in Washmo.
Huh. I did not know that.
Small world, huh?
It is a small world.
Yeah. Am I dominating this too much?
No. That's why I had you on. You're a fascinating guy. In fact, I will tell you, people in that are radio fans. They know John Hewlett. They know Mark Close, the guys who have been around forever. You've been around as long as those guys have, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. I think Mark Close has maybe 1 year on me, and okay. John Hewlett maybe has 2 years on me.
Yeah,
because they're both those guys a little bit older than I am. I think Close is pushing 70 now, if I'm not mistaken. I think he's like 69 or 70.
He might be. Rich Dalton, same way. You've been around as long as these guys have.
I used to call Rich Dalton when he was on the air at night at KDI and talked about the radio business.
I used to listen to Rich Dalton on KADI. In fact, a funny story about that is I was working in a machine shop when KADI just had a signal. They just went until after dark. They'd shut it down. Okay. And he was the afternoon guy. And KADI changed format from rock and roll to something else. And I knew they had changed when I was driving home from the machine shop and I heard Rich Dalton say, okay, next, here's something from the OJs. And I said, what? What is this? The OJs on a rock and roll store? Well, then that's how I learned they had changed formats.
That was when he was on AM. He wasn't on KADI.
Right. It was the KADI AM.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Can I tell you a weird story about I can tell you the exact day that, when KADI, the studios burnt down. Did you know this story?
No.
Okay. I started school I went to SIU Edwardsville, and I was on the quarter system. So we had a different schedule. We didn't start school till like the third week of September. I went 4 quarters a year. I just went year round when I went to school at SIU, and we started like the third week of September. Okay. I was cleaning out my dad's car. Still lived with my parents when I was a freshman. I just started at SIU, and I was cleaning out my dad's car. My dad had an FM radio in his car, which at the time was like very unusual. And I'm listening to KADI that night. And the next morning, my dad said he wasn't going to work. He says, "Why don't you drive my car to school?" I said, "Okay, fine." So I drive my dad's car to school, and I get in the car and I turn on the radio, and KADI's gone. They're off the air. I'm going, what the hell happened? The place burnt down, literally to the ground. And this was when ultimately my boss, Ted Smith, was there. And to give you an example of what a great guy Ted Smith was, they burnt down to the ground. Ted called up Richard Miller. And I mean, they got the studios burnt. The studios literally were destroyed. The transmitter building had some damage to the transmitters, but they were able to get the transmitter back up. Matter of fact, at this point in time, they were in studios over off of Manchester and Brentwood. And
I remember that they a big Manchester and Hanley, or Manchester and Brentwood.
Yes. In between there, they had a tower there.
Right. A big tower that sat up on the northwest corner there.
Right.
I remember that.
So when they went off the air, they were off the air for like almost a week. Our boss, Ted Smith, gave one of our production studios at KSLQ to Richard Miller, and they broadcast out of the production studios at the old KSLQ.
Really?
Yeah, for I think 6 months. And matter of fact, it was interesting because they would run these promos once an hour on KDI. Hey, we want to thank some of our friends in the radio. They would never mention KSOQ, which I started when I found out later, it disappointed me that they didn't actually mention they were on KSOQ. But they would mention the fact that we want to thank our friends in the radio business. And literally, when I would come in there, that studio was still being used as the KDI Air studio, because I started working not too long after that happened. Wow. As a matter of fact, if you go through some of the engineering stuff, because they transmitted the audio from the studio to the transmitter site via these, back in the day, these equalized phone lines, there were still marks from the telephone company that would say, KADI transmitter, broadcast pair, stuff like that. And there was still some of the equipment that was still marked with their name on it, because, we had to repatch everything in the studios to make sure it would go out through that thing. Anyway, that's nerd stuff.
I think it's fantastic stuff. And when you started in the radio business many years ago, when I started listening to radio, I mean, you've done it firsthand. I mean, you've lived in the radio business. It's been your life. It's been how you've made your money. Whereas I've been more of a passive fan and got into the business half-heartedly because I loved it. Okay. But it's changed so much. And Brad, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is because you've done something you're kind of a pioneer, so much so that you were in the latest edition of Talkers Magazine. I mean, Michael Harrison had an article about you, and tell us about this new endeavor called Podcastrr and what it's all about.
Believe it or not, I've had this idea for a couple of years, and I talked to all my radio buddies, and they told me I'm absolutely positively crazy. But of course, keep in mind, when I started my traffic network back in 1984, everybody told me I was crazy. I sold it for a fair amount of money in 1994, and I guess I'm, in that respect, I'm the true entrepreneur in that respect. Okay, I'm so sick and tired of what's happening on radio, and I've come to the conclusion that radio is fooling itself if it thinks it can just keep playing music and make money at doing that. And KSOQ has been a music station since the original one went on the air in 1972 up until December 31st. Of 2022, it was a music station. As of 12:01 on this past Sunday, January 1st, first year, I switched it over to all podcasts. And what I'm doing is I'm taking podcasts. We're ultimately curating podcasts. Some of them stuff I'm done myself with BS.show, some people that I've just interviewed and things like that. And the idea is ultimately making it a platform for people who would like to dip their toe into the water of podcasting. Because what's interesting to me is you talk to young people and they go, I don't listen to radio anymore. I listen to podcasts. And I go, you know what podcasts are? Podcast is talk radio. That's all.
Right. And that's
all most
that's
podcasts are.
That's what I've always said. I mean, radio is dead. Radio is not dead. Radio as the appliance that sits on your kitchen table, that may be waning. But radio as an audio format is, in my opinion, in many ways bigger than it's ever been.
The sad thing about this is, James, what's frustrating about this is being a guy who goes out and sells, 3 radio stations on a daily basis. Nielsen still says to this day, and they're the ones with the numbers, 92% of the adult population listens to radio at least once a week, which beats everything, including smartphones, the internet. And if you look at the numbers for newspapers are just in the toilet. Even, regular radio stations, like TV stations, like here in town, 245, 11, their numbers are like in the toilet.
Yeah.
They're a fraction of, you go back and look at the Cume and the share numbers that like Channel 5 has today, it's a fraction of what it had 20 and 30 years ago. Radio, if anything, is stronger. But yet the problem is you can't convince people of that. I go into a client and the client will go, I don't listen to radio anymore. And I go, what do you listen to? I listen to Sirius XM. Well, you know the story.
That's radio.
Sirius XM is still relatively small, but it's radio.
Yeah.
Or they say they listen to podcasts. I go, like, that's all radio. So what's interesting is there's a whole new group of young audio people, and it's essentially now called audio or spoken word, whatever you want to call it, who are essentially becoming talk show hosts. And look at Joe Rogan. Look at Adam Carolla. Adam Carolla got fired, when he took over for Howard Stern. It didn't work out well, so he got fired. And back, 2007, 2008, built himself a podcast studio. Everybody felt sorry for him. 5 years later, Adam Carolla was in the Guinness World Book of Records of having the most listeners to any podcast in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe Rogan, what did he get? 100 million, 200 million from Spotify. Do you know the reason why Spotify is embracing podcasts?
Tell me.
They don't have to pay the music royalties, because when you listen to Spotify, every time you listen to a song, you James Strong, or me, Brad, what Spotify has to pay for that stream to the music licensing.
That's right. That's right.
SAG, or not AFTRA. I'm saying AFTRA. No, not ASCAP,
BMI,
CSAC, and now the new one, GMR, which is, don't get me going about that. There's 4 of them now. So what Spotify said was, okay, if we put on our own programming, we keep all the money.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, they had to pay, and it's interesting because already you're seeing some of the fallout that some of the Spotify people have already left, and there's a rumor that they're not going to renew. Joe Rogan. That he's going to, after his deal's over, he's going to go back to just being on any platform
instead of Spotify exclusivity.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't know if that's true or not, but see, because once again, for me, it's fascinating. I'm a guy, if I go to the bank and try to get a loan for a new transmitter at my, at one of my radio stations, the banker turns into proctologist and he puts that thing up my butt can I say that kind of stuff on your show?
You just did.
Okay. But yet, it's fascinating to me. I watch these companies. Well, Sirius XM has lost money for 4 years. I go, okay, how do they get a loan?
Yeah.
How do they get? How can all these companies like Uber has lost money since the day they started. They've never made a profit ever. Lyft is the same way. I think DoorDash is the same way. They never make a profit because people are going, oh, we're betting on the fact that this is going to be like the next Amazon. Okay, well, there's only one Amazon. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But anyway, we're doing the Podcastrr thing. We're chopping up shows, and what I've become a podjocks. As a matter of fact, you go to podjocks.com, podjox.com. I have become, right now, I'm the only podjock. Matter of fact, if you want to be a podjock, you're hired. And what I do is I take these shows, I do an intro. In other words, I say, hey, I'm Brad. I'm one of the podjocks here at Podcastrr, and it's PODCASTRR, podcastrr.com. I'm one of the podjocks here at podcastrr.com. Let me tell you about this next thing that's coming up. And I've one of them that I had was a reused thing about a guy by the name of the History Guy. You know who the History Guy is?
Yeah, I think you've told me about him. In fact, he's on Podcastrr, correct?
Yes. The History Guy is a guy who's a corporate dude, worked for a big insurance company in St. Louis. I didn't know he was a local guy until I saw one of his things and he referred to St. Louis. Anyway, it turns out he referred to living in the St. Louis area. History Guy is the guy, I'd probably say maybe late 40s, early 50s, had a big corporate job. His division got eliminated. Him and everybody else gone. So he loved doing history. So he starts off doing these podcasts in his basement. Now he's making a 6-figure living, maybe even 7 figures, by doing a YouTube channel. That's what he does.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I did an interview with him, and I've got that up on Podcastrr right now. Are you hearing beeps, by the way?
No,
Okay.
Are you?
Oh, somebody's calling me. So
okay.
Anyway, that's what we're doing, Podcastrr, and we stream it on podcastrr.fm. If you want to find out things you probably don't know about, if you want to find out about news about the podcast industry, go to podcastrr.news. It's all spelled RR instead of ER, PODCASTRR, podcastrr.news. And if you wanted to talk back and forth like you would on Facebook about podcasts, go to podcastrr.social. We've got our own social media channel up there. Did you know about that one either?
Well, if you go to podcastrr.com, there's links to all those. That's I knew about it.
But I've got direct email or direct URLs to all those. Podcastrr.news, podcastrr.fm, podcastrr.social, and podcastrr.com. And there's more of them coming, by the way. So,
but anyway, all those links are on podcastrr.com, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
If you just go on to, they're all on the menu at Podcastrr. Matter of fact, one of my consultants said to me, "Too many links." I'm going like, well, I want to make it easy to find stuff. It frustrates me when you go to a website and there's like 3 links and you can't find what you're looking for. I put it to the point where if you can't find it on my site, you ain't looking hard enough. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. Well, now Brad, this is a different way to look at radio. You're saying the old KSLQ. Now, is the old KSLQ still on the air as far as over the airways?
Yeah, it's running Podcastrr.
So if I turn to, what is it, 94.5? Or I'm sorry, 104.5?
104.5, you'll hear Podcastrr.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
And we're running it as it's running it as a formatted station where we're running 3 podcasts an hour with commercials. And if we have enough time, we run at the top of the hour what's called a mini podcast, a mini pod. And that's what's going on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if you are interested, and this is what's fascinating to me, if you're hearing James Strong and you would like to have your podcast on my station and on our streaming channel, podcastrr.fm, and I'm trying to make some money by actually having people pay me a little bit to promote their podcast. Because what we're doing is we're aiming at the small guy who starts out and puts up a podcast channel and has 2 listeners. We're trying to increase that. That's our job. Our job is the same thing we did for clients as a radio station. In other words, a car dealer, we want more people to show up to buy cars. We would tell, hey, people, come on down to Chris Offenberg Ford, Lincoln, Mercury, and Washmo and test drive the new F-150. We're doing the same thing for podcasters. We're telling, when we're doing social media and the whole bit, hey, you want to hear James Strong podcast? Go to podcastrr.fm and we'll play it. And then this is not up yet, but we'll actually have our own Podcastrr pod channel where you can go and listen to the podcasts we have that are on the air. So in other words, we'll have the linear channel, which is being broadcast live and streamed live, and the non-linear channel, which is you can go in and just, on demand, pick up podcasts.
Well, you've got on-demand stuff on podcastrr.com right now, correct?
Yes, but we're going to have, there will be we have a Podcastrr YouTube, we have a Podcastrr podcast channel, or we're going to call it, a site, but there's hardly anything on it. If you search for Podcastrr, it's there, but it's not actually. It's got 3 shows on it. This has been something I've been working on this for 2 years, but heavily for 3 months or 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. There aren't enough hours in the day. You know what I'm saying?
Well, here's the thing, and dear listeners, take my advice on this. If you've ever wanted to get into the podcasting business, if you ever wanted to do a podcast, if you don't know how, but kind of wanted to try it, contact Brad at podcastrr.com. And right now you can get it on the ground floor because you don't have 25 different podcasts on your station yet. You will.
No, I do not.
You will, but this is a good time to get it on the ground floor.
Well, ultimately our goal is to have about 100, and have it. And see, the interesting thing is, I found a guy that made an interesting comment to me. He said, music radio stations have done a great job through the years at curating music, and curating's become a big buzzword in a lot of different things now.
Define that, please.
Right. Curating means, in other words, if you go to a curated museum, somebody, or like for example, I used to have this guest on all the time, the St. Louis Art Show that was like in Clayton. You don't talk about that.
Yeah. I used to go to that every year. I loved it.
that was a curated exhibit. In other words, people have to submit their art to the people. There was a board that worked at that, say, this sucks. Oh, this is great. So in other words, what we're doing is, and it's right now, it's me. I'm taking podcasts and I'm saying, I like this. I'm going to put it on the air. Now, ultimately, and the interesting thing about it is, this is where the FCC comes in, and it could be interesting. If you're a musician and you call me up and say, hey, Brad, I want you to play my radio play my song on the radio, and I'll pay you $10 every time you play my song. I can't do that because that's against the law. That's called payola. Okay. Right. But if you call me up and say, hey, Brad, I want you to play my podcast, once a day for the next 30 days, I can do that because it's not music.
Exactly. Right.
It's paid programming is what it comes down to. It's not paid, and there's nothing against that. Matter of fact, if you listen to 97.1 in St. Louis or on the weekend, all it is paid programming. It's the same stupid chiropractors telling you about all the crazy stuff, and the same stupid financial guys who tell you about you need to retire at 50 and retirement's great. And I said, you know what retirement is, James?
Death.
The number one cause of death in the United States is retirement.
This has been your mantra forever.
I'm telling you, because unfortunately, my mom and dad, both very well educated. My mom was a special education teacher. My dad was a civil engineer. They retired. I can graph it. They went downhill in a hurry. Yeah. I mean, because they didn't get up in the morning. They could do whatever they want. They just lounged around all day long. And I shouldn't say that. My dad ended up watching a lot of TV, and my mom, would, go do weird stuff. But there's something about, and not only that, you're going to get really weird when I tell you this. How this hit me was about 30 years ago. I used to wake up on Sunday mornings and watch all the preachers on TV on Sunday morning. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
And there's this one preacher, I can't remember, he talked about retirement is ungodly. And his whole sermon was, why is it ungodly? What do retirement people say? I can do everything I want. It's all about me. I can wake up in the morning. I can do whatever I want all day long. And nobody tells me what to do. I don't know a boss anymore. It's me. If I want to just stay around. And he said, it should never be about you. It should never be all about you. And not only that, he said, search the Bible. There's no such thing as retirement in the Bible. And he also talked about the fact that Moses died when he was 120 or something like that. Yeah. Moses never died. Jesus didn't, Moses never retired. Jesus never retired. You know what I'm saying? He worked to the last day of his life.
Well, and there's retirement and there's retirement. There's retiring, walking away from the day job where you make your money and doing something you love. And there's retiring, sitting around watching television and waiting for the heart to stop beating. So there's different types of retirement.
You can tell I've touched a nerve with James because he's looking forward to retirement.
No, I'm not. I'm looking forward to the day where I can switch horses and do something different and not depend on the paycheck from the day job.
Well, see, you talk about horses. One of my favorite sayings is I've been sort of and it's funny because you talked about the Talkers magazine thing. There's a whole story behind that, which is, and nobody in the radio business knows what that's all about, but it's like the Bible. It literally is the Bible of talk radio industry.
It is.
And he's expanded to include podcasting as well, too, which I think is interesting because Michael Harrison is an interesting guy. He sees the future. He's the guy who's sitting there thinking like, hey, I think he's been in the radio business longer than me. He's been all over the country. I think he worked at an NPR station, San Francisco and all that kind of stuff. I think he worked at WPLJ in New York, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, he's a visionary kind of guy. And what's interesting was he wrote this article about me. And I say some things in the article which some of my radio brethren aren't real happy about because I've already heard from a couple of them, but that's a whole nother story. But I consider myself a pioneer. And you know what the definition of a pioneer is?
Tell me.
Someone who's found dead, face first in the dirt with an arrow in the back. That's a pioneer. That's a pioneer. Because you get shot in the back, but with an arrow, and you lay on the prairie out someplace east of Denver, and you decompose into the high plains, and you're gone. That's a pioneer.
Well, I guess you're the ultimate pioneer because you've probably been shot in the back with arrows many times in your career by various people in the industry, and you've survived them all.
And used to work for one of them.
Which is another story for another day.
I know we're going way long in this. Can I tell you one thing that's very frustrating to me?
Please.
I found these fascinating guys out of Wichita, Kansas. Have I told you this story?
You have, but it's a good one. Tell the audience.
there's a guy by the name of Tyler Hoover, who is an interesting character. Started out, he was in the car business. It was a car salesman, then had his own used car lot. And he started buying all these, what he calls hoopties, which are nice cars, like they're Mercedes, but they're like 20 years old, like 150,000 miles, and they're in bad shape. He started buying all these hoopties and videoing himself going to buy these cars and then taking them to this guy who ultimately became the car wizard. And because Tyler is not a mechanic, he doesn't work on the cars himself. He buys these cars, which he thinks are iconic cars. He's always going after like a lot of Mercedes and BMWs, Z8s and things like that. So he started doing this YouTube channel, and he started making money at it, because the way you make money on YouTube is you get a percentage of the ad revenue that YouTube gets. In other words, if you got a YouTube channel and like if you watch a YouTube video, you see those ads, whoever channel you're looking at, if they're monetized and they have enough viewership, they get a check. So Tyler Hoover started doing this and started making money at it. So he started telling his friends, the car wizard, this guy's name is Dave something or other, owns a repair shop. He says, Dave, you need to start a YouTube channel. I don't want to do that. So we got him to do it. Then he's got another guy. But Dave doesn't work. The car wizard doesn't work on BMWs, but the car ninja does. So he gets this guy by the name of Johnny to start. And Johnny works on BMWs. And Johnny, I think, is an immigrant from Italy or something like that. And he's a master mechanic, and he starts working on all these, cars. And then he gets another guy, a guy named John Ross, who is also working on cars. And John Ross puts up a YouTube channel called WatchGR.go. These guys, there's like 7 or 8 of them in Wichita, Kansas. Yes, in Wichita. And they're making a fortune at doing car videos. And this is all they do. Tyler Hoover makes, like, if you go to Starstat YT, did I ever tell you about this website, James?
I think you have, but continue, please.
Starstat.yt. If you go to that, and it's a weird TLD, it's .yt. Starstat, just like it sounds, STARSTAT.yt. You go to that channel, you go to that YouTube channel, and you put in the screen name of a YouTuber, and it'll tell you how much money they're making. Okay, it'll tell you that on an average day, that Tyler Hoover makes $800 or $900. Some days he'll make $1,200 on a day because of YouTube.
Yeah.
And matter of fact, it's so, in other words, I'm trying to do the same thing that what Tyler Hoover has done, is saying, hey, come on, jump on in, the water's fine. I'll hold your hand a little bit. That's what he did. He did with all these guys. Mm-hmm. He held their hand, showed how to do a video, stuff like that. That's my goal, because not only do I want to expand what I'm doing, I want people to grow with me. That's what frustrates me about the radio business. And what's interesting is they cross-promote each other. You watching Hoovy's Garage, that's his channel, Hoovy's Garage video. Who does he have on it? He has the Car Wizard on with him. He has the Car Ninja. He has Watch JR Go. And if you watch a JR Go video, here's Hoovy in it. Do you think if I called like some of my competing radio stations and say, hey, I'd like to help promote your radio station, you help promote mine, the answer would be?
No, they wouldn't be interested. They'd see it as competition.
Yeah, they would say, F you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what they'd say. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, why can't me as a broadcaster in KSOQ say, hey, we turned to podcasts. If you still want music, hey, check out KFAV. You like country music? It's a great station. Or matter of fact, if you like talk, check out Tracy's station. She's got this new station, 93.3. No, because I would do it. They won't. Because they go, oh, your competition, we're not. I go, we're all in the same. It's like an industry association, okay?
Exactly.
You go to the Chamber of Commerce meeting. I go to Chamber of Commerce meetings. There's people there who are my competition. They're selling against me in with advertising specialties and stuff like that. But yet we're there because we're trying to grow the pot bigger. As the tide rises, so do all boats. The reason that St. Charles County expands is because if the market gets bigger, we all make more money. If you're a retailer in St. Charles County 30 years ago and there were only 100,000 people in St. Charles County, now you're doing better because now there's 400,000 people in St. Charles County.
Right.
The ocean gets bigger, but yet it's that in the radio business, it's that thing, well, we're not going to talk about it. And the TV industry is even worse, because for years, if we did a fundraiser and the Channel 2 people came out and the Channel 2 news at night, you know what they'd say? A local radio station was raising funds for, they won't even give our call letters. It's like, how screwed up is this?
Like they're afraid somebody's going to turn them off and turn you on.
Well, but the sad part of that is when you go to the store,
you go to Schnucks. There's lots of stuff on the shelf. It's your choice, okay? It's not like Schnucks puts up a sign and says, if you live in St. Charles County, you can only use aisles 1 through 4 because that's all what St. Charles County people eat. No, it's a marketplace of stuff.
Exactly.
The radio business should be the same way. We should cross promote. And quite honestly, if one of my competitors, if Diane Jones is listening to this, hey, call me up. I'll run ads for it. Matter of fact, I ran ads years ago. I ran ads for the Casey blood drive. I called up John Beck at Casey. I said, hey, John, I love what you're doing with the American Red Cross blood drive. Have your guys send me the commercials, the promos for the Red Cross blood drives. I put them on KSOQ. I had people call me, you're running ads for Casey? Yeah, I know. I put that on. Why would you do that? Because they're doing good for the community. They're helping out the community. I want to help them help the community.
And so I'm certain they reciprocated, right?
No, they did not. It does. But see, once again, you know what the true idea of giving is?
Tell me.
Not expecting anything in receipt.
That's very biblical, Brad.
I mean, the idea being is if I give you something, if I walk, here's the crazy thing. I've done this before. Matter of fact, I've walked up to people. I did it on Christmas Day. I had a guy standing outside of QT. He's panhandling. I walked up to him. I go, know what you're doing? He goes, I'm trying to make money. I go, here's the 10. And he goes, oh my God, you give me 10. And he goes, he says, why would you give me 10? He says, most people will give me 1. I go, what the hell? It's 10. Now I don't know if the guy's going to, buy a 6-pack of beer or whatever. You know what? I give it, and I wanted nothing in return. I didn't want the guy to come, cut my grass or anything like that. Once again, that's the idea, the true giving. And the idea being is if I give, I should not ask for anything in receipt. Right. I should just essentially said, and see, that's the thing. Did I get mad about Casey not running ads for me? Nah, because I didn't ask for it. I didn't expect it.
Exactly.
We talked too long, James.
That's in my opinion, the good thing about podcasting. When we first started this off, and the listeners don't know this, but I'm going to tell them. You said, you know what? I think 15 minutes would be good. We're over 51 minutes now, and I've not said, hey, we're up against a hard break. We got to quit. No, you do whatever you want.
But the problem with this is I got to edit it up and somehow get it on Podcastrr because I do have I got the 16 to 18 minute breaks in Podcastrr. So somehow or another. Maybe I'll chop this one up in 3 pieces.
Yeah, you can do that. I mean, you're a talented guy, Brad. Once again, if somebody wants to get a hold of you and wants to have their podcast on Podcastrr, 2rs.com, what do they need to do?
Well, here's the crazy thing. I do this on my own show on bs.show with Shelley Barr on Westplex 1071. I do the crazy thing. I give out my cell phone number. This is my true cell phone number. Area code 314-280-8880. Once again, 314-280-8880. Call me. I answered the phone. Matter of fact, it's interesting because yesterday I got 2 phone calls. I didn't even know that article in Talkers Magazine was on Thursday until one of the guys called me yesterday. I was in Illinois, of all things, picking up some equipment in Illinois. And I'm in Springfield, and I'm at a Burger King, and my phone rings. I don't recognize the number. It's Ian Frobe from Free Talk Live. You know what that show is?
Yeah.
It's Ian himself. Hey, Brad, I want to talk to you about Podcastrr. I go, who is this? He goes, it's Ian Frobe from Talk, Free Talk Live. I go, you're on like a bunch of stations.
He is. Yeah.
He's like hundreds of stations. He found it fascinating what I was doing. And once again, how did he get my phone number? It's in the Michael Harrison article. And, and crazy, if you want to text me, call me, to the point where so many times, I don't give out my cell phone number. You know what? Why should I try to stop people from contacting me? I'm a little guy. I'm proud of that. If you try to call Bob Pittman at iHeart, you'll never be able to talk to him. Ever, 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 ever. You call me at my company, I answer the damn phone. How's that?
That's true. One more question before we go. One of the things with podcasting, and I fell into this. I'm not going to say it's a trap. I'm going to say it's an evolution. But the one thing about podcasts is the rule on my podcast is you can say whatever you want just so you don't slander or libel. You can't do that. It's against the law. It's the language.
Yes.
With this going over the airways, do the podcasters need to temper the language?
Yes, unfortunately, because we're a broadcast station. I paid a lot of my money before FCC license, and I don't want to lose it.
Exactly.
So the problem I have there is, and you and I have talked about this. I've told you the idea about Podcastrr long before I did it. And I said to you, hey, you got some podcast buddies. And you said the problem is they like to, shall we say, frequently drop the F-bomb, right?
Exactly. Every last one of them do. No exceptions.
Right. And I can't do that. And quite honestly, what I find fascinating about this is, and I'll tell you something from me watching videos, the pendulum has swung the opposite direction on YouTube. And you know how I know that? Because there are all these guys who had YouTube channels who were becoming more and more popular, and they have F-bomb and S-bomb left and right. Now they bleep it out. Do you know why that is?
Tell me.
Because of the fact that they can't get advertisers that they're dropping the F-bomb and the S-bomb all the time.
You know, and that makes sense. When Tom Likas had his internet show, he had Tim Conway Jr., who was a radio guy, on. And Tim Conway Jr. came on with the first 3 minutes. He says, look, Tom, I got to do this and get this off my chest. F, 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 and he dropped the F-bomb about 15 straight times. Okay, now I've done it. I don't need to do it anymore.
Well,
that's kind of how it's become.
Well, it was like when Stern first went over to Sirius XM for like the first 2 weeks, every third word out of his mouth was the F-bomb.
Right.
And then I think they even got tired of it.
Exactly. It's not entertaining anymore.
You know, and it was to the point where, like, if your mom and dad say, okay, when we're away, never go into the kitchen and never drink any of our cans of beer. Okay. And all of a sudden, if your parents one day said, hey, kid, you know, there's beer in the refrigerator. If you want it, go at it. And what happens? The kids go in and they kill every 6-pack in the refrigerator. They get drunk, they get sick, they throw up, and they go, not doing that again. You know
exactly. Exactly. You know? And there's more creative ways you can get your point across without dropping the F-bomb. There really is.
One of my, and I'm exact opposite of this. One of my program directors, I have these guys who imparted all this wisdom on me through the years. He said, a good communicator communicates with an economy of words, but not too many different words. In other words, you don't want to sound stilted. You don't want to say, like, you know, well, the reverse osmosis theory of inverse, you know, cataclysm or whatever. People go, what the hell did he say? You want to be able to communicate not down to like a third grade level, but by the same token, not make it sound like it's a PhD lecture. You know what I mean?
Right. Your vocabulary needs to be something in between William F. Buckley and Helen Keller.
Right. And another one of my very first program directors used to always teach us about watching out for crutches. And crutches are a good, you know, you can hear these young DJs, hey, good morning to you. Morning. How you doing this morning? Hey, it's 7:35, 33 degrees. It's cold in the city, 7:35. You crutch on that because you don't know what to say. So you say things that are easy to say. Hey,
you're eating up airtime.
Right. And you're crutching on that. That's become a crutch. And the really good disc jockeys, the really good ones, can say over the intro of a song an incredible sentence and never repeat the same word twice and never drop the F-bomb or the S-bomb or the S-bomb. You know, it used to be the 7 dirty words,
George Carlin routine.
George Carlin.
Yeah.
It's down to 2 now. It's down to the S-bomb and the F-bomb. You can get away with with donkey and kitty cat. You know what I'm talking about?
Right.
You can get away with all that stuff, but you still can't get away with the S and the F word.
Nope.
And to me, it's like, I have a vocabulary that I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but yet I try to talk like the average guy. You know what I mean? To the point where when you run into somebody at a gas station, hey, how you doing? Nice car you have. What's under the hood? You know, you and I are both car nuts. You know, hey, what kind of gas mileage you get? What? How many horsepower? Is that turbocharged? You know, that kind of stuff. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Okay, are we done yet?
I think we are. We've turned 15 minutes into almost an hour now. So
okay. Is this one of the worst ones you've ever done?
No. Brad, talking to you. What does Shelley say? Brad, talking to you is like a slice of heaven.
She's full of it.
I love Shelley. She's a sweetheart.
Yeah.
And if you want to listen to Brad and Shelley every day from Monday through Thursday, is it now?
No, yesterday I had to go out of town because I had to pick up something.
Okay. So normally it's Monday through Friday, 6 to 8 roughly?
Yeah, and we have our own website, bs.show, and what I haven't done a real good job with it because I've been working on podcast too much. After I get off the air, I chop up the show and I turn it into a podcast, and it's on bs.show. But I haven't done it.
Or do the old-fashioned way and turn on 107.1 in the morning time.
Yeah, if you're in St. Charles County, it comes in real well. Matter of fact, from our transmitters site right there at 5Z and Bryan Road. Yep, that's us. We're in the same tower as 97.1.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Brad,
James,
thank you very much.
hey,
I appreciate the time, man.
now I'm going to pin you down on something. Okay, we had some technical issues. Okay, will you see if you can get your thing fixed on your end? You know
I'm planning on doing that today to pick up the new device to go from the iPhone to the Rodecaster.
And if you want to call me back or later, we can try it and see what happens. But here's what I'm going to do. I want to do a show with you, and we do have to keep it to 15 minutes. I want to talk radio with you every week. Can we do that?
I'd love to.
And we'll do it like a quick little 15-minute hit. We can do it on Saturday morning, and we'll talk to it from two perspectives: from a guy who's in the business, which is me, and a guy from your perspective, B, who is an active listener who consumes a lot of radio. I think that would be an interesting show.
I do too. I think it'd be fun. And from a cost standpoint, I will charge you something less for my time than Joe Rogan charges Spotify. How's that?
And I won't charge you on my Podcastrr channel either. How's that?
Deal.
Okay, James, to give you an idea of how much of a weird nerd I am, you know what I'm going to do right now?
Tell me.
I know you work in your car.
Yeah.
I'm going to go work on a tractor, and I bought something recently which was damaged. It has frame damage. I'm going to go fire up my oxyacetylene torch, try to bend this frame back into shape, and then hit it with my MIG welder and try to fix this thing. And hopefully by noon today, it'll be running, and I'll be out working on it. I'll drive
put pictures of it on your Facebook page.
I don't know if I want to do that or not. It might be stolen and somebody might want it back, right?
That could be true.
Actually, I bought it from a lawn care equipment company. It's, this may sound weird. I love to cut grass. As a matter of fact, at times you have seen me cutting grass at the crap transfer.
I have. I absolutely have. I've honked the horn and waved, and sometimes you hear me, sometimes you don't.
And when I say I love to cut grass, I love to cut grass. I've cut grass since I've been like 10 years old. And I have to tell you, the one thing about cutting grass is when you and I talk, the stuff goes out into the, on the radio, goes out into the ionosphere, and who knows what the hell happens. And I can't really look at it. When I get done cutting a lawn or a field or something like that, I can look at that and say, wow, I did that.
Yeah.
It looks great.
It
looks great. You know what I'm saying?
I absolutely do know what you're saying.
So now I'm going to go fix my broken tractor.
Okay. Have fun fixing your tractor. Brad, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Podcastrr2rs.com. That's it? We're done?
We're done.
Okay. Take care. Have a good day, Brad.
Hey.
Thank you.
Seriously, was that okay for you?
It was fantastic. It was fantastic for me. I'm going to sign off now. Thank you very much. Hang tight. Okay. That's it. We're done. JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. That's the website, or that's the email address. Send me your email address, and I will send you a link to the podcast. You could download it and listen to it at your leisure. Until next time, this is James Strong saying adios.